Hey guys, Chari5 here, and with the release of Five Nights at Freddy's Ultimate Custom Night, my interest in the series got rejuvenated. I hadn't been so interested in the series since Sister Location, which, sure, I guess wasn't too long ago, but at the rapid rate at which these games come out, it seems like it's been forever ago. Having skipped over Pizzeria Simulator and World, as well as the books, I was a little shocked to see that over the course of 4 years, 50 different animatronic characters have been made all together. It got me thinking, why does this have such a huge following? I mean, clearly I'm interested, so I know why I'm a quote-unquote fan, but was my reasoning the same as everyone else's? It was then that I started thinking about how simple in concept and mechanics the series was. How is it that something this simple has the following it has? Which got me thinking about Undertale and how massively adored that game is, even today. So, if I may, I'd like to get a little insight as to why I think these games and games like these have the fandoms that they have. Now, granted, this isn't so much a psychological breakdown. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but more of an uneducated, introspective look at why I think people enjoy these games so much and others like them. Right off the bat, as I mentioned before, there's an element of simplicity. In a modern day where video games have new and innovative control schemes and mechanics, these games are pretty bare-boned. And yes, despite this, they're still quite revolutionary. While at its core, Five Nights is a point-and-click game, the use of cameras as well as music boxes and air ducts makes it stand out. Sure, you have to be fast, but there aren't a whole lot of things to learn, just a whole lot to be aware of. Okay, maybe Ultimate Custom Night has a lot of controls, but you get the idea. As for Undertale, it's pretty much the definition of what a role-playing game is. However, not only is the way you fight unique, but the way you go about battles as a whole is unique, having the option of not killing a single monster during your playthrough. What's more, every monster in the game has their own way of being charmed so that you may have mercy on them. So, of course, added to the fact that these games are simple, they also stand out from the genres they belong to. Speaking of genres, you'll notice that both games have an element of horror to them. While I wouldn't call either game particularly scary, they both have moments that can be creepy and have somewhat disturbing imagery. But what makes this imagery work is what I like to call the veil. A visual element that not only disguises what makes the game creepy, but also complements it. The character designs in Undertale are pretty cute and very recognizable. It's sorta easy to get sucked in when your characters aren't super detailed, but are still able to stand out. Now, we can discuss whether or not animatronics are creepy, but the fact of the matter is, they're not meant to be. Well, not in real life anyway. This is the idea in mind with Five Nights. The veil is the animatronics themselves. This is furthered in the second game with the toy animatronics, which are made to look a lot cuter than their original counterparts. Future entries in the series explore both, with 3 and 4 giving the characters more grotesque designs, and World and Pizzeria Simulator bringing in more cutesy ones. That being said, neither game is really trying to hide what they are. I mean, in Five Nights at Freddy's, we know from the very menu that the game is meant to frighten players. With Undertale, the first character we encounter sets the example of who we're supposed to even trust. That's another thing I think both these games do pretty well. They sort of go against the norm. I know I already mentioned that they kind of stand out from the genres they belong to, but it's so much more than that. In an RPG, you don't really expect the first character you talk to be one of the ultimate bad guys, and much less do you expect him to trick you into almost dying at the very start of the game. From the beginning, Undertale breaks your trust, and so you tread more lightly with every character you meet. Heck, I remember when I played the game for the first time. After what happened with Flowey, I couldn't trust Toriel at all.
Well, screw you, Goat Mom.
How did you get God, you're the only person I've met that, hates Goat Mom.
Are you hurt? I don't trust Goat Mom.
If I hadn't known beforehand that Sans was a boss fight, I probably would have trusted him completely. And even then, Sans himself goes against Undertale's own norms. Throughout the whole game, we're taught that if we don't want to or can't fight, we can show mercy, but with Sans, neither is the case. He's the only character that can actively dodge our attacks. Five Nights is a bit different in the way it goes against the norm. Personally, I think it handles jump scares differently. With the age of Let's Players and streamers, we like seeing people react to things. We feel connected to them in a way. As a result, in recent years there's been an influx not only of horror games, but of jump scare related horror games. And whether or not you think it's a cheap tactic and not really scary is up to you, I myself agree, but that's not to say that it doesn't work or that it can't be used effectively. At first, Five Nights is pretty scary because you don't understand how the mechanics work and the jump scares are more effective. In fact, I think that rings true for every new entry in the series, despite the core mechanics being the same. However, once that fear wears off, the jump scare no longer becomes something to scare you, but to signify a game over. I've actually often related Five Nights at Freddy's to the game Slender. After a while, it just stops being scary and just starts being frustrating, but you still want to try again, and that's the sign of a well-designed game in my opinion. Not only that, but both games set a mood. Neither of them really feels like they're trying too hard to be scary. One difference they do share, and this is where I think Five Nights goes against the norm, is the way set jump scares are handled. Normally, the reason the trope works is that we're not expecting it, hence why they often appear during moments of tension, but where we finally begin to feel safe, and it's usually accompanied by silence. This is the movie version of jump scares. The game version often has the player running around in an attempt to not get jumped by whatever's chasing the player, mostly only showing up if the player looks back to check if they've escaped. What Five Nights does is limit the character to a single position where they're unable to run away, and their only protection is how well they can keep the enemies out, as opposed to away from them. Okay, so their gameplay is unique, but it's also simple. So that's the reason these games are as big as they are? Not at all. I mean, at least I don't think. In fact, I'd say the game itself is the last thing that has anything to do with their popularity. Clearly, the fact that they are games is important. I mean, they're made by game developers that want to share their product with the world. Added to that, there's clearly a connection with the players and the character they're playing as. But beyond that, there's something that sets both of these apart. Aside from wanting to share a product, both Scott Cawthon and Toby Fox wanted to share a story. With Undertale, it's the story of a young child who ends up in a world inhabited by monsters who are trying to escape the underground and re-enter society on the surface, where they once lived. Of course, that's the back-of-the-box synopsis and not even close to what the game has to offer. For Five Nights at Freddy's, the story's kinda up to the people, the way I see it. Especially with new developments from Ultimate Custom Night, we can glean that Scott Cawthon kinda made up the story as it went along. Maybe at one point he wanted to make sense of it all, but as more and more details got introduced, the story became more complicated and, I'd imagine, more difficult to write. But you may be thinking, well, if the story's nothing to write home about, then how does that make them special? There's an element to both games that seems to be appearing in media more and more: breaking the fourth wall. Now, I could make an entire video on breaking the fourth wall and my opinions on the trope as a whole, but I do think that there are right and wrong ways to do it, and both these games do it extremely well. They keep everything in universe. In Five Nights at Freddy's, the mini-games throughout the series serve as a bit of a fourth wall break, as there's something meant for the player to experience and not the main character. If you think about it, the only way to access the minigames in Five Nights 2 is by losing, so clearly it's not something for the main character to learn about. There are clues here and there that are meant for the players to see that don't affect the game at all. In Undertale, the genocide route is the epitome of fourth wall breaking, but never to the point where they acknowledge that it's a game. Sure, in the neutral route, Asgore can destroy the mercy button and Flowey can load saves that he creates, but in the fight with Sans, he explains how, much like Flowey, he's aware that you keep resetting time, and he fights for the timeline to stay how it is. He doesn't remember past timelines, but he knows that this isn't the first time he's met you. Even further, Kara, the game's ultimate antagonist, explains that they got tired of resetting and wants to erase the world. Even when you do, you can still bring the game back, but the files are now tainted with Kara in the endings. Not only did these games build worlds, but they made you feel attached to these worlds and their characters by bridging the gap between our world and theirs and not utterly destroying the wall that separates us. So clearly, story is an important factor here. By themselves, there isn't a whole lot of gameplay involved. What keeps us going is our want to know what monsters we'll meet next, what Asgore is like, what Phone Guy will say during the next night. They're all motivators. But there's one very important thing that I think a lot of people don't take into consideration when thinking about why people like these games so much. Lore. Lore goes beyond world building and even beyond story. It's a combination of both, but with a hint of speculation. Nowadays, content creators are more personalities than anything else, and we as people like creating a version of them which is projected onto us. As such, whenever someone says or reveals something about their persona, it's often regarded as lore. The same thing happens with both these games, however the lore depends on things that aren't told to us, things that are implied. In fact, much in the same way that Undertale has more fourth wall breaking, I think Five Nights at Freddy's has more lore, and it's achieved by showing and not telling. With the absence of dialogue, speculation arises. Who is this purple guy? Why is this child crying? Why is there an IV next to this child's bed? They're all context clues, but that's not to say that dialogue isn't important to establish lore either. Baby from Sister Location is very dialogue heavy, and most of her story comes from the things she tells us, and it's now our job to piece that information together with the rest of the lore. In Undertale, a very similar thing happens. While most endings wrap up things pretty well, certain routes raise other questions. Like, for example, where did Alphys end up during the genocide route after evacuating the rest of the monsters? Why is it that Sans knows about resetting in the space-time continuum? Why does Sans bleed when you defeat him? I mean, there's determination, but did he have it in his bones? Not to mention W.D. Gasser and his followers as a whole. It's information that's teased at, but never fully given to us, ultimately leading us to try and piece together something for ourselves until it eventually becomes what we call a headcanon. It's our desire to know more about the story, about the world, about these characters, that creates these scenarios in our mind that have little to nothing to do with the actual game's narrative. If these games existed in the 90s, I imagine that they would have been looked over. You would have only heard how interesting they were through word of mouth, and their popularity would have probably suffered as a result. But in an age where we're always communicating, sharing things we enjoy, we're able to let our ideas grow. Lore is supported by people, by a sense of belonging. A person who's only played Undertale once might not appreciate the game in the same way that someone who's pieced together this whole world in their mind related to the game, and the many others like them would. There's a reason that people like being part of a group. They want to feel like they belong. They like being with people that understand them and the things that they enjoy, so naturally, being with people who have made similar headcanons is attractive. People who can offer lore you would have never thought of yourself. It's like a friend group and an inside joke. Others who aren't in on it most likely won't understand what you're talking about, but that, in a way, makes it all more meaningful. It's the things we don't see about these games and these worlds that make them so fascinating. I went into Undertale knowing that I was playing for the story. I played Five Nights, yes, for the challenge, but I've stuck around for the lore and the countless theories surrounding the series. While I've never played or even experienced it, I'm willing to bet that everything I just talked about can apply to Bendy and the Ink Machine too. It's the same reason why shows like Steven Universe, Gravity Falls, Over the Garden Wall, and even Adventure Time are so popular. They all have interesting characters, captivating dialogue with dark undertones, and a lore that the respective communities like establishing, reading into, and learning about. And while, yes, the communities themselves can be very toxic, that's not exactly the point or the argument I'm trying to make. You can enjoy these games without necessarily being a part of the community. I love Undertale and the various different projects that very talented fans of the game have made. From artwork to comics to musicals to many different things that I can appreciate without necessarily being a part of it. While saying that I love Five Nights at Freddy's would be an overstatement, I can definitely say that I appreciate what the series is and that I enjoy the narrative presented to us. I am always looking forward to learning more about the story behind the animatronics. And while I am less keen on what the Five Nights community has to offer in a visually artistic medium, that doesn't mean I don't adore what the series has wrought musically. In the end, there's never any one thing that makes a game enjoyable, and we certainly wouldn't bother creating a headcanon if we weren't already interested in what the established canonicity had to offer us. I think in a way, everybody likes a good mystery, even if not all of us are willing to go out of our way to solve it. Some of us like being bystanders, simply reading into things without giving them too much thought. I remember when Five Nights at Freddy's 3 came out, a friend and I watched a Let's Play together and discussed the story we had known so far, and tried reading into the little things that we noticed. I think it's the first time I ever watched a Let's Play with someone else, and it was because we were both so interested in the lore. So again, it's not just the game, it's not just the story, it's also about the mystery of the world these developers have created, and in turn, what we as players think the answers to those mysteries are. We may not always be right, but it adds to a conversation. It's almost like a game beyond the game. I know a lot of people think that these two games are overrated, and I completely understand. I felt that way about Undertale, but I gave myself a chance to play it because I figured that if so many people liked it, it must have something to offer. And of course, if you find value in gameplay, you won't find a whole lot with these two, but if you value lore, which as it seems a lot of people do, then it's no mystery why these games have the following that they have. Don't let what a group of toxic people does affect whether or not you enjoy something, and on a similar note, don't let their actions stop you from trying something new. But again, that's a topic for another conversation. I just wanted to throw my 2 cents in to maybe see if people agree with me on why certain games and shows have the following they have. And hey, if you like it for some other reason, let me know in the comments. Until next time, stay safe and stay awesome. This is Char5, signing off.